Hello again, everybody. We're now moving on to our second panel of the day, how AI and big data are transforming universities. We've touched upon this in the previous panel, but now we're going to focus directly on this issue. It's a subject, of course, that has already produced ample research, that produces ample literature daily. I should know because I monitor that literature and I write about it as well. I have to confess I tend to focus on the negative, but someone has to. Negative as in possible adverse effects of the pervasive use now of technology, AI, and big data in universities. And so it is a subject, of course, that has been developing over the past decade in particular, that I think we can already say has transformed higher education across the world. In some regions, admittedly more than in others, in dramatic ways, probably in unprecedented ways, but I think it raises also a lot of questions, a lot of issues regarding the very mission, I think, of universities, among other questions. But here we're going to focus on a number of dimensions. We know that technology has already transformed everything from administration to governance to curricula, pedagogy, in particular with respect to the learning space. I'm, of course, referring to remote learning, and of course, research, among many other dimensions. I'm going to briefly introduce the three distinguished panelists who are going to share their expertise on these subjects with us today. First, Professor Francisco Veloso, who's the Dean. Are you there? Yes, you are. Can't hear you, though. You have to activate your mic. Dean of the Imperial College Business School in London. His research focuses on high-tech innovation and entrepreneurship. He's also a consultant and advisor for multiple companies, governments, universities across the world. Next, we'll have Dr. Jason Matheny. He's founding director of the Center for Security and Emerging Technology at Georgetown University, and a member of the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence and of the National Academy's Intelligence Community Studies Board in the US. And he has also served in the past on several White House committees on artificial intelligence, biosecurity, and quantum information science. And then we'll have Professor Manuela Veloso. I have to stress the fact that we have two Velosos on this panel today, but that there's no relation between them. It just so happens. Professor Manuela Veloso is the head of JP Morgan AI Research. She's a professor in the School of Computer Science at Carnegie Mellon University. She specializes in particular in artificial intelligence and robotics. So I'll first turn to Professor Francisco Veloso, who is going to open the panel and further debate. I think it's better to leave all the questions and then debate with the audience and among members of the panel for the end. So Professor Francisco Veloso, the floor is now yours.
Thank you very much. Just to double check first that you're hearing me fine now. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. So thank you very much for the invitation to contribute. As you mentioned, I think my idea is to kind of launch a little bit some of the ideas and then have a conversation around the topic rather than to be very long. And so, you know, as a university and here at the business school at Imperial, you know, I had the business school as part of Imperial College, which of course has an important involvement in the area of AI, machine learning, and these types of topics. And so, that's not my direct area, but I will talk about from the perspective of how it's evolving and being part of other areas outside of computing themselves, because I think that's one of the things that I can contribute and how it relates to that. And so first, of course, that in all leading universities with an important technical component, there's a lot of research happening in the area of computing and in the area of AI, and certainly at Imperial, that is very much anchored in the departments of computing, but also in the department of mathematics at Imperial College. But then it starts to expand and to connect to many other areas, and you can see this theme of AI percolating many different specific fields in different ways. And from the previous presentation, we already heard, for example, through some of the institutes that were being presented, as this is touching so many different areas, from food to learning. And this is certainly what we're experiencing and part of here at Imperial. So there's the direct research in the area of AI that is, increasing its presence across the universities. And we see that very directly here at the business school. So when I think about what's been the evolution and the types of topics that we cover, and even the faculty that we've been hiring, I can see the role of AI growing within the business environment across different areas. It certainly starts more directly and in a very significant way with all the areas that more directly builds upon analytics. And so let's imagine that we're talking about, for example, operations, about distributed routing of packages or people or movements. This is something that's very important from the business side of things and from the types of decisions that are being made. And so certainly in our department of analytics operations, that has grown very quickly over time, and it's quite present and very relevant nowadays. But over the last few years, that has also started to expand very quickly into other areas: economics, finance, human resources, people, and entrepreneurship. And you can find now AI-related work and topics very much present across the field. So you can use these types of tools to understand, for example, financial decision-making and optimizations in financial decision-making, certainly in high-speed trading, for example, but even more generally, for example, how you make automated decisions in insurance, for example, is certainly something that that has grown in importance and that you have presence. Or when you're talking about human resources in terms of, for example, how do you select CVs? How do you make decisions about who to hire? What kind of tools you have in place to support and to augment the types of work that you do in areas of organizational behavior, people manage. All of these things are starting to happen. And the same thing is happening, for example, even in the area of entrepreneurship. It's trying to understand anything from work, like what do top leaders of organizations, what type of decisions they make, and how do you go and understand, with a big amount of data, the types of decisions that they make and characterize them, and helping to understand that in terms of better decision making at the senior levels of organizations. And another example, more recently, one of our faculty members is involved in terms of also using AI to understand, for example, venture capital decisions and learning by venture capitalists across different investments in the area of new ventures, as just some of the areas in the area of business that this has been evolving to. But what this has made is precisely to start to create opportunities to then connect across areas of knowledge. And this is one of the areas where I feel that there's a lot of opportunity to connect between different departments and different areas of a university to really explore different and new topics in very interesting ways. And so here at Imperial, we've been working on a very significant initiative that's going to be basically connecting across the entire university around these areas of machine learning to try to precisely explore, what can we do together once we connect the technical knowledge with areas such as the one that you have in business or in medical to tackle important challenges where this cross-disciplinary knowledge is really important and significant. And this is, one area that we see as quite important for our future at Imperial College, but we see this more broadly as quite important in different environments as well. The last part I wanted to talk about research has to do with the new challenges, and certainly the area of ethical decision-making and ethical leadership is quite important. One very, simple example that one of our faculty members is involved on is biases associated with, AI-powered decisions in insurance. Who should get insured and who should not get insured. And the fact that when you have some automated decision-making on that space, that has the potential to immediately create a sort of bias. How do you assess that bias? How do you control? How do you correct that kinds of bias? This is something that's very, very important, for the finance industry. And this is, of course, something that's quite important for a business school working in these areas. And so these new ethical biases, types of issues that emerge out of this area of knowledge is quite important for business and society, and something that we are also very keen on continuing to develop. The second topic that I'd just like to address very briefly is education. So far I talked about various areas of research and what we can and cannot do on that space. But one of the things that we're finding quite important is how to think and connect that to the educational role of universities. And this is about preparing the students for the fundamentals. And so we need to, given the increasing relevant presence of AI and machine learning in today's society, the students need to understand that even at the cursory look. So that's important for us, that we train students that are just doing masters in business administration, more general, or MSCs in finance. So how do we prepare them so that they understand at least the fundamentals of how AI and machine learning is percolating into industry, so that they can make better decisions, even if they're not specific people working in the technical areas. That is something that's quite important. And then you start to, of course, connect that to the more substantive issues. So the people that are working, in our case, in business analytics, let alone people that are working in mathematics or computing, that really have to be at the cutting edge of education in this area. But what I'd like to stress from my point of view is how important this is getting to be, even in areas that are not at the forefront of just advancing our understanding of AI and machine learning. But one thing that we're very, very keen on being involved, this was something that was also mentioned in the previous talk from the director of NSF, is about AI augmented learning. And he mentioned the new center in the University of Colorado as one example. We see that as a tremendous opportunity. We at the business school in particular have been investing in digital education for now 5, 6, 7 years in a very significant way. We have a top-ranked global online MBA where through which we put hundreds of students every year. And one thing that we've learned is precisely how much we can, use the data about how the students learn, how the students evolve, what works and how doesn't work. And we have now a set of projects with the Department of Mathematics on AI augmented learning, using the data that we collect on our global online MBA, that we think is very, very promising, and an area that we think is of really fundamental importance for the future of universities and for the future of education. And you may be involved in it just a little bit, you may be a consumer of that knowledge, or you may be at the forefront of trying to understand how AIs can change education. But in our case, we'd really like to be at the forefront of that movement, and we see that as quite important for us, but also I think more broadly for the university. Then the last bit that I just wanted to mention has to do just with translation and extension and connection. I mean, it's about what we do in terms of research, it's about what we do in terms of education, but it's also about engagement. I already mentioned how we work with a variety of companies on these topics. But this is also, for example, how we help the broader community to develop even more basic skills, so micro-credentials, certificates, and skills that are perhaps outside the degree space, as we think traditionally about the role of universities as undergraduates or graduate degrees, but in which the core knowledge that we develop at the university can really play an important role, and through which we can contribute to the broader environment. And this is another area that I think we need to be progressively involved in contributing to. And finally, in what I would call AI for good, or the social dimension. I mean, we can very quickly understand the opportunities, but also the threats and the challenges that AI is bringing to companies across the entire globe, to universities even, as I've mentioned already, and it's been also been mentioned in the previous talk. But it's very clear that if we think about the huge opportunity that AI can bring to just social dimension, even anything from just understanding social need to understanding how you cater from the poorer regions of the world, or the more underprivileged segments of the population. There's a huge need and opportunity to deploy these tools in a very fundamental way beyond when we think about just the business environment, that I think the universities need to play a very important role and can contribute in a very significant way. And that is kind of like the last bit that I wanted to leave out in terms of what we can do with these types of tools. And so this is what I'd like to leave in terms of my contribution to start the discussion. Thank you very much. I think you're muted, Corinne.
Sorry, I was saying thank you very much. I was saying I have a couple of questions already that I'd like to ask you, but as said, I think it's best to leave all questions for the end so that we can start a discussion. So I'll turn now to Dr. Jason. Is it Matheny? Am I pronouncing this right?
It's Matheny.
Matheny, okay. I knew I was going to get it wrong.
No worries.
All right. Matheny, okay. Go ahead, please.
Thanks. I'm going to try to share my screen, and we'll see if it works. Is that visible, Corinne?
Yes.
Great.
Yes, it is.
So I wanted to tell you all about a project that we've started at Georgetown University in the US, focused on AI policy. It's the largest group within the US focused on AI policy, and we're really proud to have it at Georgetown. It started 2 years ago with an initial grant of $55 million from foundations. And the goal has been to really understand the impacts that AI will have on national security, international security, and a range of domestic and global issues. We're nonpartisan. Because we're in DC, we're able to meet with the policy community regularly, and they are our primary audience. We support work in security and technology studies across the university. We also partner with a number of other universities and other think tanks. We have a staff of a little over 60 people, and about half of that staff is made up of students who we train in order to fill a pipeline of talent that will need to go into policy positions in the US government, but also in other governments, given that a lot of our students are from other countries. Here's a pastiche of the photographs of our team, who come from a variety of different backgrounds. Many are computer scientists, some are economists, statisticians, linguists, political scientists, but all share a common interest in making sure that AI and other technologies are developed for the public good. And I think part of why we're so proud to be at Georgetown is that Georgetown has a cultural tradition of really emphasizing that we understand that technology should serve humanity rather than the other way around. And the spirit of service and the commitment to the public good is something that runs through not only Georgetown, but also through our center at CSET. we have three lines of research. The first is that we quantify some of the foundations of AI, which includes workforce or talent trends, the amount of money that the public sector and the private sector is investing in various technologies, the amount of computing power that's devoted to AI, the differences in data sets that are used for AI, and differences in algorithms and models. One thing that we've invested a lot in is buying and organizing a variety of data from around the world that can help us gain better insights into technology investments and technology capabilities. And this includes a fairly large translation pipeline. In addition to our own staff, we have a little over 20 full-time translators who work on translating documents from Chinese or Russian or other languages into English, so we're able to analyze developments in other countries. On the application side, we look at how AI is being applied to different domains that are relevant to national and global security, including cybersecurity, defense applications. And we run a project called Foretell, which I'll tell you a little more about in a minute, that's focused on forecasting the applications. And it's a participatory platform. Anybody can generate forecasts. You can see how your forecasts compare to thousands of other people's forecasts. And ultimately, this draws on the observation that if you take the average of hundreds or thousands of people's individual judgments, that's likely to be more accurate than any single individual. A third category of work looks at the role of policy in affecting AI development. We look a lot at international alliances and how those alliances are helping to shape the terrain of AI. We look at international standards, and we look at how trade and industrial policy can affect AI. This is a list of current research products. All of this is available at our website, which you can visit. It's the URL is at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, cset.georgetown.edu. All of these reports are free, as is everything else we do. And the data behind this research, much of it is also something that we're able to share. In a few cases, we're bound by data agreements not to be able to share the data, but in many cases we are able to share, and we love to share. We see this as a collaborative enterprise, and we don't see how certainly one center is going to be able to make much progress alone. We have a cross-matrixed team. We have research fellows who focus on analysis. They're supported by analysts and students. We have on-site data scientists and engineers. We have a survey specialist. We have translators. And then the products team is supported by editors and designers. We are really fortunate to have a team that is smart, but also kind and humble and highly collegial. And they've just worked really well with each other, including during this extremely difficult time over the last 7 months. I mentioned that we invest a lot in data resources, and we have 19 data providers who we purchase data from, in addition to doing our own scraping and collection of data. We've purchased access to most of the major scholarly databases of research in AI, so that we're able to analyze trends in multiple languages across multiple subdomains of AI. We also have access to job postings, business intelligence, and so on. We're very text based. We tend not to have done research on multimedia, and that's something where we could probably use more help. There's lots of interesting ways of, for example, trying to assess what's happening globally with data centers by looking at overhead imagery. On the data side, these are the categories of data that we have either purchased or that we collect. And again, if you find that there's data here that you would be interested in collaborating on, please send me an email so that we can identify ways to partner. You can find our reports at cset.georgetown.edu. We have a bi-weekly or fortnightly e-newsletter, policy.ai, which you can subscribe to. I really enjoy it. I'm not responsible for writing it, but we've got an outstanding editor who really, I think, finds some of the most interesting developments in AI to highlight, as well as relevant events, relevant publications, relevant news stories, all condensed into a readable form that comes out every 2 weeks. We hold a monthly seminar series that's online that anyone is most welcome to join for at cset.georgetown.edu. You can sign up for those seminars. We also have occasional special webinars, and we love it when folks send us the policy questions that they have. Usually we receive these from the US government. Sometimes we receive them from OECD or from other multilateral organizations, but we really do want to make sure that the work that we pursue is useful to the world and ultimately improves our understanding of where this technology is going. With that, I look forward to the discussion later. Thank you. Oh, Corinne, you're on mute again.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, very funny on an event on technology. But anyway, thank you very much. Again, leaving questions for the end, and I'm now turning to Professor Manuela Veloso. Please, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. Hi, Francisco. We have the same last name. We are not related, but we know each other really well from his time at Carnegie Mellon, because we are Portuguese, both of us. And so, hi, Francisco, and hi, everybody else. So I'm going just to make a few remarks, and then I'll be happy to answer more questions. But basically, it's like this. I have been in academia for 30 plus years. And 2 years ago, I joined JP Morgan, actually New York, to create an AI research group at JP Morgan. But of course, my understanding of core research has to do a lot with academia. So I'll just focus on two aspects, which is the fact that indeed at AI research in JP Morgan, we have been fostering and encouraging and supporting collaborations with faculty at different universities. So we introduced this concept of JP Morgan Faculty Research Awards, and we make a call, which is coming out at the end of this month, to several universities. Basically, faculty propose to address the problems that we highlight in the call, and then we engage with the faculty for 1 year. JP Morgan contacts JP Morgan AI research representatives to try to advance the state of the art of crucial financial problems in collaboration with the academics. We also introduced this JP Morgan PhD fellowships to try to support PhD students in their quests, in their thesis, and also for 1 year. So since I joined JP Morgan, we started these two, lines of collaboration between AI and finance and the actual academic world. Another thing that is very dear to our heart is that we also were able to, for the first time, have a joint chair between the UK Royal Academy of Engineering and JP Morgan for a faculty at Imperial College. So it was a very interesting collaboration between education, academia, and JP Morgan in this first ever joint partnership to give a chair. The recipient of the chair was Professor Francesca Toni from the Imperial College, and we expect and hope to have such collaborations. Her work will we'll collaborate with her work on explainability of AI, and we are very excited about this topic and this opportunity for collaboration. So what I'm saying is that, to address the question of education, and we are like very tightly trying to keep this connection between the finance world and the academic world. And we will, as long as eventually we have the support of the leadership at JP Morgan, and as long as the AI research team is there and I'm heading it, we really hope to keep this going. Now, I need to explain one thing about the financial world in a very crispy way, which is the following. Somehow the financial world is a complicated, very, how do you say, complex and huge problem or opportunity, because first of all, for example, JP Morgan has 200K employees, 200,000, has more data than I can even find tera or petabytes. It has a lot of like different countries, different languages, different businesses, from investment to retail to private banking. So it's a wonderful kind of like example of an institution which touches a lot of areas, a very large number of areas. Therefore, we at AI Research had to understand how to organize the research we do in this domain. And we came up with 7 somehow aspirational goals, to try to see if AI can help cure the cancer kind of like problems, because we are, in addition to applied AI, which exists throughout the whole firm, we, in some sense, we have this goal of being more the AI research picture. So something like more long-term, to try to solve problems of a nature that will eventually be more transformative. So these 7 areas we organize in the following way. 3 of them are in the essence of the financial domain, and they consist of AI to predict and affect complex economic systems. So the fact that we have trading, the fact that we have all sorts of like negotiations, multi-agent thinking, all problems of finance, including all these different interactions, also with a lot of uncertainty, with a lot of like hidden knowledge. So that problem is, how can AI help in that type of like complex economic systems, the many countries, the macroeconomics, the microeconomics, and try to understand how AI can help there. And in that sense, we have been working on areas of simulation of multi-agent systems and try to do reinforcement learning along those areas. Then another area is AI to actually what we call liberate data safely. As I mentioned, there is a lot of data circulating in this firm, and also in our connections with the universities. They want data, but data is very private. So how do we go about making data available for research, data available for different business to use? So we are trying to work a lot on how AI, through cryptography, through synthetic data, through actually all sorts of like data cleaning, data rationalization. How do we go about transforming data into knowledge, data from multimodal data? How can we address the data problem? So one is the complex economic systems problem, the other one is the data. The third aspect is actually how do we go and try to have AI help eradicate financial crime? So there is all the problems of the misuse of the financial institution, the frauds, the money laundering, and how do we go about having AI help in that domain too? So these are the 3 foundational aspects that AI works in the financial domain at AI Research JP Morgan. And then there are 3 that have to do with the stakeholders. So the stakeholders at JP Morgan Chase, and so we all understand, are our clients, our employees, and our regulators. So we have AI to try to empower employees AI to try to perfect the client experience, and AI to try to agentize this policy compliance and the understanding of policy and how to make it efficient. So we have employees, clients, and regulators. And then the seventh overarching research goal is really to try to do what many have already mentioned, have AI have values, so trust, explainability, fairness, and social good. So it's overall, how do we go about thinking in this domain, addressing these problems of bias, fairness, and explainability within the business. And so these 7 areas are the areas that we are pursuing research at JP Morgan, and that's what I wanted to share. So in summary, I just want to say that we have these 7 areas, and then we have this collaboration with universities. We get engaged in conferences, and we hope to continue to foster all opportunities for students in technology, in AI, to come to JP Morgan summer internships, full-time jobs, or even faculty on sabbaticals. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, I'll get the conversation going with first a couple of questions to Francisco. Based on what you said, I was thinking about, business school 20 years ago, getting an MBA 20 years ago, and getting an MBA today. If I were to ask you, can you mention maybe 3 or 4 major differences? Of course, I'm talking about what the technology and AI has been changing to business schools, not just to how fields are taught in business school, but also to contents. If I were to ask you, can you make a comparison between getting an MBA 20 years ago and getting an MBA today in the technological age, what would you say the major differences are? And where, it's easy to spot opportunities, would you be able to perhaps have maybe a bit of a more critical assessment of the differences as well?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I mean, actually, let me divide that question in kind of 2 parts, because one thing that I think is important to recognize is that actually it's changed much less than it should have in 20 years. So, of course, there are things that are still the same as they were 20 years ago. And so if you're learning some of the fundamentals of economics, microeconomics, for example, or some of the fundamentals in human behavior to try to understand how organizations behave, or fundamentals of strategy, some of those things have not changed that much. And so you do find a very common substrate of what you have now and what you have 20 years ago. I think that there are 2 or 3 important changes that are happening, and depending on which, depending on the school, I guess, those may be more or less accelerated. But I do think that overall, the MBA has changed much less than it should have changed compared to where it needs to be, especially with the change over the last, 4 or 5 years. But I think that there are important changes already that you do find present in many of them. So certainly, the first one is to recognize that the whole field of, say, entrepreneurship, and this idea that you're starting new companies and that you can have a very important economic effect through the entrepreneurial route was something that 20 years ago was not so present. And this is important generally just in terms of thinking about the role of new businesses, but also from the point of view of preparing the students to be entrepreneurs themselves. This is something that 20 years ago was much less present when you thought about what was the types of skills that the MBAs were going to have. Now, a lot of that, especially over the last few years, relate to some of the changes that are happening in terms of just digital transformation. So a very important part of the interest and the growth of that interest in terms of the student journey
in the entrepreneurship and in innovation area over the last few years is driven by just how much is happening on the business, driven by a lot of these new tech tools, including AI-driven tools. So the MBA has realized that there's a lot of opportunity here, and they're very eager to understand and to get the fundamentals of that, so that they can make a difference in that space. Now, what you do see nowadays is, a presence on the MBA of, some of the fundamentals of understanding this, very important technical changes that we're talking about it. So, understanding the fundamentals of data, understanding the fundamentals of analytics, also some of the issues related to AI. But for most of the people that are doing MBAs, they don't have, the technical skill sets that will allow them to get very deep into this space. So a lot of what the MBA does, especially, kind of a modern state-of-the-art MBA, is to get an understanding of the students of what is changing in the industry because of that. And so that may be, for example, to help them understand automated decision-making associated with, for example, how you make selection and how you understand your labor force, and having a work around that, understanding what are the types of tools that are available for you to be able to understand, read, deploy, improve your workforce in that area. It's also in terms of how a lot of areas are having a very important component of this automated decision making that is happening in all sorts of areas. But a lot of it is the instrumental learning of what is happening and how it's affecting business, rather than actually digging deeper into the technical component. The other part that I think is quite important in terms of the evolution of the MBA is to recognize that the way that the people that are getting into the job market now, precisely because of the availability of these types of tools that we're discussing, if do not have a set of other complementary skills like creativity, ability to work in teams, ability to empathize, and a lot of other social dimensions that complement the core technical subjects, the marketing, the strategy, the finance, the economics, they're going to be, their capabilities are not going to be as sustainable as enduring in the modern workforce, and in a workforce and in a business environment that's going to be leveraging a lot of these new toolkits that are being drawn up because of the use of these advanced data, including AI. So I would say that the important transformations that's happening on the MBA is both on better understanding what these tools are doing to industry, creating opportunities through projects, initiatives, and company connections for them to have that understanding, and realizing that they need to get an understanding of the technical skills, but also to develop some of their social skills in a different way, so that they can be leading in these new environments into the future. And so that's certainly been a lot of the emphasis in our own MBA has been to really push as much as we can on the technical side, but recognizing that their knowledge that they come with is not going to make them specialists on the AI side, but that they can understand what's happening there, and then bring on the leadership and the personal capabilities to complement that. And the rest I already talked about is more about our entry into the digital education and trying to leverage also these types of tools in the way that you teach and learn with the students, just on the process. For example, just give you one example of that. One of the first papers that came out of the work that we're doing with the maths department and the global online MBA is understanding modes of learning. The fact that you can understand very clearly that people study differently, and that depending on the way that you study, some of the things don't make a difference in terms of your final outcomes in terms of grades, but for some approaches towards learning, you do find a difference, and inferior results, for example, at the end of the program, and learning from that in terms of trying to make interventions into the way that students learn. And so that's a different area about how you deliver the MBA education, rather than than what the students learn and what are the skills that you're trying to develop on them.
And generally speaking, in terms of the degree itself, is it, this is something that I really don't know, but I'm thinking about it, hearing you speaking, is the attractiveness of an MBA degree just as high as it was a couple decades ago, given that now I'm thinking of the pool of the startups, which emphasizes creativity and innovation, and not necessarily the education or higher education that goes with it. That's at least the model that we're presented by mainstream media daily. Has that affected in any way the standing of the MBA as a degree, as a gateway to a successful entrepreneurial career?
I think that, certainly I think it has affected in the sense that there are a plethora of opportunities there. And so a lot of people are deciding to go and try and adopt other routes by which they get their education. And so the growth of more specialized degrees is making an important difference in terms of the way that the students and the professionals feel that they can find opportunities to advance their career. And so in our case, for example, we offer a range of other degrees, from business analytics to climate change and finance, more specialized degrees in the area of finance at all levels, and they're extremely popular. So I think the MBA is still a very powerful and a very important, career opportunity, especially for people that, for example, did not have a first training in business. They may have had a training in a different area, anything from social sciences or engineering, natural sciences, and they want to get a set of fundamental understanding of business tools to a degree that they did not have access to, in their first education, while at the same time understanding and developing some of the specific capabilities in terms of the focus. And that's the thing that a lot of the MBAs allow you to focus more on marketing, or you can focus on more on the entrepreneurial route or on the analytics side. And that allows you to then get that combination of general skill set and still advance the knowledge in a couple of different themes that are going to be relevant for your movement in your career. What I think is different is that that's now one of the vehicles by which you can do that. And some people still find that to be the most productive and the most powerful for their career, especially if your ambition is to have a more general managerial career. For some others, they may choose a more specialized degree and use that as the route to advance their business set of capabilities. And so I think it's gotten more diverse. And that's why I think that in a lot of places around the world, there's some pressure in terms of admissions to the MBA, because there's a lot of students that are now not necessarily looking at only at the MBA, but also looking at whether the MBA or something else is the best route for them to advance their education.
Okay, thank you very much. Jason, I'll turn to you with the first question. You emphasized in your presentation the fact that here in the center's research, it's apparently essential to you that AI is developed for the public good, to serve humanity, you said, and not the other way around. And the question that this suggested to me was this, that for this to happen at a significant level worldwide, wouldn't that require some kind of common ethical framework, common guidelines among, let's say, at least major actors? And I'm talking about corporations, tech companies, and governments, of course. And, perhaps what we vaguely refer to as global governance, whatever that is. But wouldn't that be predicated on the assumption that there is a possibility to arrive at a minimal consensus in terms of an ethical guideline, a general framework of rules? And the reason I'm asking that is that, looking at the whole thing from here today, I think that we're looking more at a kind of anarchistic environment than a rules-based one for now, at least. So what would you answer to that?
Yes, I agree. And I think we've made some progress on that in the last couple of years. The OECD in particular has advanced a set of AI principles that were later adopted by the G20. Those principles identify 5 values for the responsible stewardship of trustworthy AI. AI should benefit people and the planet by driving inclusive growth, sustainable development, and well-being. AI systems should be designed in a way that respects the rule of law, human rights, democratic values, and diversity. Notably, China did not sign on to that particular principle when the G20 considered the set, but the other countries did. There should be transparency and responsible disclosure around AI systems to ensure that people understand AI-based outcomes and can challenge them. I think that issue of transparency is really fundamental. AI systems must function in a robust, secure, and safe way throughout their life cycles, and potential risks should be continually assessed and managed. This one I think is really important because we're only just beginning to understand the ways in which these systems are not robust. Many times they were developed for either academic use or for a very narrow set of commercial uses. And when we apply them more broadly, we discover ways in which those systems are vulnerable. Lastly, organizations and individuals developing, deploying, and operating AI systems should be held accountable for their proper functioning in line with the above principles. So I think that's a good start. And OECD now has a AI observatory, which is sort of monitoring the multilateral institutions for the ways in which they're implementing these principles.
And so you're optimistic about the
I'm
future
optimistic
of...
to the extent that that I think there is actually consensus by a large number of governments and a very large number of companies that we need principles like these. And we have seen, many governments and companies and NGOs and academic organizations sign on to these principles as well as to others on the Partnership on AI. So all of that I think is encouraging, but you also need for monitoring to make sure that actors who are not signing on to these principles and not putting them into practice are publicly disclosed. So we need a way of monitoring. And I think that function within the OECD AI Observatory is a really essential one.
So I'm sorry to interrupt. Corinne, I'm sorry to interrupt. I have exactly 3 minutes because I have to disconnect.
So I should have started with you. You should have said that. I would have reversed it. What I actually want, if you have a couple more minutes, what I actually wanted to ask you was to tell us a little bit about the other expertise that you have in robotics, and to ask you to make...
I cannot do any of that because I literally have 2 minutes, but I'm going to tell you that somehow in robotics, my experience has been on building complete AI systems with perception, cognition, and action. And therefore, here at JP Morgan also, I'm trying to make people understand that AI, while a science of components, natural language processing, speech recognition, machine learning, machine vision, is about, in fact, putting it all together. So I think that eventually AI will provide, robots that are either software robots or real robots that can learn through interaction with humans and to process data, have algorithms that make decisions and execute them. And I'm actually going to talk a lot. I'm going to probably contact Jason also, because we have to make sure that these intelligent creatures comply with what are values, what are rules of the game. It's like you cannot allow them to, for example, I have a pawn that moves like a queen. So there are many things that are part of these, AI business The only final thought I want to say, because we hear all about this future of AI being like, and the bad decisions that AI makes and the AI systems and everything. I only want to say one thing. We need to stop looking at AI as a one-shot thing. AI is a machinery that will learn over time. So if it makes the wrong decisions now, biased decisions because it was trained with data that we don't know, because after some time you stop keeping track of everything that's going on when you have 10,000 transactions a second. So, you know, it's just the scale that what is AI is actually very useful to do makes you lose track. So it has to be something that we open our hearts, and the AI systems may not be doing all the right things up front, but the important thing is being in control. So we can actually retrain, we can give feedback, and the machine can become eventually better over time. It's like an assistant you have that will have to eventually learn. And I think that learning will never stop because our values change, because our tasks change. So that's the paradigm that AI should be embraced by all of us. Okay. So Jason, thank you very much. Francisco, thank you very much. Thank you for having me, Corinne. I apologize, but I do.
And thank you very much.
Okay. Let me just chip in. I cannot get my video started. Thank you, Manuela, for your generosity. And let's continue the conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, all. Thank you, Isabel.
Okay, so there's two of you left, so you're going to get more questions. Francisco, I wanted to ask you whether, assume this is already the case, I wanted to ask you a question about partnerships between business schools and companies, the corporate world, which I assume are already pretty much
Sorry, I couldn't hear the rest of your question. I'm not sure I understood your question. You're asking if they exist, or I'm not sure I understood the question you were making. Ah, okay.
There is no sound, Corinne. You can't.
I mean, I can, if you're talking about I can start to speak about a couple of partnerships, and then we'll see whether Corinne comes online. Probably she's having some technical difficulties. I mean, we have a lot of partnerships in many different areas. I think that, for example, in this area close to the topic that we're discussing, you know, for example, we have a fintech center that we started with the collaboration of Citibank. And this is one of the areas, for example, that of course, as Manuela was already describing, that there is a lot of activity going on in the financial sector, you know, and you heard some of the examples from Manuela on what's happening in the case of JP Morgan, but this is true for all major financial corporations. And so this creates a very interesting opportunity to engage with the business school to try to better understand what their issues are. And you heard some of those. You know, how can we make sure that we are preparing people to be, you know, well equipped to enter that space? You know, what are the topics of research that are important for us to be focusing on, so that we're addressing major issues that the corporates are facing? You know, all of these things, you know, are very important that we connect with the corporate world, and in particular in this area. In the areas of AI and machine learning, you know, there's a big gap still between what is possible and what's actually working in the corporates and making a difference. And one of the things that we see our role in the business school is precisely to try to help navigate, you know, what is possible, what's not possible, what's happening, and making sure that the students are well equipped to handle and to have that understanding in a significant way. And that has led, for example, for us to create a specific degree last year in fintech. So we have a master's in fintech that has become super you know, popular in just a couple of years. We went from 0 to, I think, over 600 applications this year, you know, for a program that is running for the second year. And this is because there's a lot of interest for the people that are entering the financial sector to understand how technology is changing this industry. And so this is, one of many examples that we partner around that we can do with a variety of firms and nonprofits. And this is something that we've been growing over time in different spaces and in different fields. I gave this example of finance, but for example, last week we started a very significant initiative was announced last week that involves the business school at Imperial, the Singapore Management University, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, and 9 major banks in the area of climate change and finance, right? For example, how do you leverage the financial tools to address climate change? So this is a little bit further away from the topic that we are addressing today, but it's just another example of how significant the corporate connectivity is for us at all levels. And Corinne, I think you're back, and I don't know if you had specific questions about the corporate connectivity that I could address. I talked a little bit more generically, but you may have a specific question that you wanted to ask.
Yeah, I'm back. Sorry about that. My computer audio is just down. Especially just today. It usually works, but today decided not to, so I had to redial again to connect the audio via the phone. Sorry about that. I was going to ask whether this trend could develop to such an extent that it would, and of course the question would extend beyond business schools to universities in general, whether you can foresee the trend evolving in the future to such an extent that it would actually change the business model of universities proper.
Well, I think that there are two parts to that. I think that in general, so Imperial in that regard is a very connected university to corporates just by the nature of how it operates. And so we're the largest UK university in terms of corporate research grants and corporate research initiatives, given the size of the university and one of the leading international. So at Imperial, this is something that's very natural, and we really feel that it's one of the USPs of Imperial, which is the ability to really look at fundamental problems, but in a way that are very closely connected to the practical applications. And this ethos is very present throughout the entire university, and and this is in that sense similar to places like MIT and Carnegie Mellon that I know well, and where this same ethos is quite present. So I think that the evolution in some of these areas, like we're talking about today, like AI, is only accelerated that relevance, because there's a very important challenge in trying to understand how these tools and these technologies are shaping industry, are shaping firms, are shaping society. And therefore, to do that, you really need to connect what's happening in the university and the tools that are being developed to the application, to the actual deployment and learning back. So that's one cycle that's very important, but also the other way around. I mean, there are areas and things that they're advancing quicker actually on the corporate side than they are on the academic side. And it's very much worthwhile to learn back and bring that back to the university. So let me give you a couple of examples of both ways. So one is, for example, we have one of our faculty members in the economics department that has been involved in using machine learning and AI tools to understand just major financial announcements by central banks and by corporates. So as you know, corporations have these very written formal communications that they do to the market. So central banks do the speeches by the the head of the central bank or some of the people in the monetary committees, and these really have an impact on the market. Corporates do quarterly reports to the analysts where the CEO talks, or there's a formal statement that is issued to the market. One of the things that we're doing is to apply machine learning to characterize the statements, both the written statements and the spoken statements, to try to understand trends, characterizations, and to be understanding that language in a much more precise way that can help understand how it moves the market in a direction or the other. So in that sense, this is a way that, for example, the tools that are developed at the university can be brought then to the corporates in a way that help them understand how what they say and what and is interpreted to the market in a much more fundamental way. But the reverse is also true. For example, I was talking with a startup here in London a few weeks ago, and they were telling me that one of the things that they're doing is applying these AI and machine learning tools to improve the marketing materials that are sent out to customers in a couple of different industries, including the financial industry. And this, I was talking to some of our marketing faculty here, and this is something that is still not very much part of the mainstream business research to understand how AI is, for example, really affecting what's happening on the marketing side in a very fundamental way. And this is an area where there's still a lot to be gained. And so you can gain a lot by bringing the corporates back into the business school to then analyze what kind of impact that's happening in a much more structured way. So this is just some of the examples on the business side, but this involves more broadly. So for example, we're talking with a large tech firm to partner with Imperial to connect across different areas in this area of AI and machine learning, because this large corporate has interests in very different, they supply technology to a lot of different clients. And so they were very interested in working with us to try to understand and to, learn from how this technology is affecting, just the way that companies organize, the decisions that they're making, how their clients work, because reflecting on that bigger picture is quite important and requires not only some of the knowledge that happens on the business school, but also understanding from the people that are actually happening and developing some of the technical tools, people from natural sciences that are in mathematics and other more fundamental areas. And so this is certainly a set of topics that requires not just the engagement of one area, but engagement of multiple areas. Where that is also very, very true is in the area of, for example, medical, in the medical area, where anything from using AI to read the exams that are made with patients, and then understanding the implications of that to the entire hospital or to the entire system of health, requires both understanding of the medical side, understanding of the statistical and tool side, but also the organizational element, the policy dimension. I mean, you can see how this is bringing such fundamental changes that really require the entire, a very diverse array of capabilities to be engaged with corporates and with government to try to analyze that in a deep way.
Okay, thank you very much. Jason, I wanted to ask you whether or if anything, what the onset of the pandemic changed for your team, not in the way you work. I assumed, like the rest of the world, you started working at home, but in the many issues that you're looking at, some of them perhaps projecting into the future. Has this changed anything that you're focusing on in any way, in any significant way?
Yes, it has. In fact, some of the forecasting work that we do has been looking at how COVID and the pandemic will affect global supply chains, international collaborations, the way in which work is done in the AI industry. And if you go to fortel-cset.com, you'll be able to see those forecasts. I think there are, in fact, fairly significant predictions that things will not just snap back into place after the pandemic, that we have sort of seen a new equilibrium for how the technology industry will operate. That having been in this experience for most of us, I'm sure will have been working from home for more than a year by the time we'll be able to go back to offices. I think the expectation will be that we want to be able to spend more time at home. Some of us will have become accustomed to having, lunch with our spouse or be able to take the occasional cat nap at home in the middle of the day, and they're not going to want to give that up. So I think, one, we're already seeing that AI companies are starting to shift to make telework and remote work built in to their business model permanently. But we're also seeing an increased emphasis on supply chain security. That is, a variety of different countries are deciding to reshore some supply chains, from medical equipment, pharmaceuticals, but also to things like semiconductors. And I think what has happened is that COVID has sort of created a sort of X-ray that demonstrated the fault lines within the global supply chain. We've sort of discovered where some of the dependencies are, and now a variety of countries are saying, well, we don't want those vulnerabilities to exist so that in another crisis we can't get the supplies that we need. So different countries are making their own decisions about how to address that. In the United States, there's discussions now about whether we should be reshoring much of the microelectronics production that fuels AI, so that we're not quite as dependent on other countries. There are going to be realistic limits to that. I mean, we have a global economy. We're not going to turn it into just a national economy. But I think that we will see increased emphasis by a variety of countries on having domestic capacity in key industries.
That and PPE, right?
That's right.
Okay, we have about 15 minutes left, a little less. So I'd like to open to anyone who wants to ask questions, audience, other panelists, moderators, anybody?
Yes. Corinne?
Isabel.
Okay, so just to thank you for your great interventions. And I have a question that in a way comes also from the first panel, and that has to do with the disruption of the degree through micro-credentials, which is something that is now being widely discussed all over the world, and that has been boosted by the impact of COVID. How do you see it from the two different perspectives, from the UK and from Georgetown, how these more focused, credit-based, stackable credentials will truly affect the position of universities, our mission, and the way we organize ourselves as organizations and in general. So do you see that the whole discussion around micro-credentials is going to disrupt the way the degree is being perceived and the value of degree itself in society?
I don't know, you want to start, Jason, or I can start, doesn't matter. Okay, so I think that that's a very important area that is certainly going to have a very significant impact in universities. But I see it more as, I mean, I think depending on the universities and depending on where you are in the organization of the sector, it may be an opportunity or it may be a big threat, and I'll explain why I see that. So I think that the first degree in particular, the undergraduate, there's a very important social element of just maturing and being part of a cohort that I don't think is going away. That doesn't mean that there's not going to be a variety of people that are not going to prefer to do these micro degrees and these micro credentials and pursue a path. But I still see that even with that, just like we've had in the past, vocational education, and we're going to have a variety of offerings, but I think that there's still going to be a very fundamental opportunity and need for a first degree, at least of the first 3 years, that's going to allow you to, learn a set of valuable skills, but also learn how to mature and work with others in a way that it helps you go into the job market with a different perspective. And one of the reasons why I see that is also, for example, on the growth of the master's degree after the Bologna reform. So there was a lot of people that were saying, well, now people are going to do just the 3 years and they're going to go on the job market and they won't go back to the universities. In fact, what we've seen has been a huge growth in Europe of the master's degree right following on the undergraduate. And that says that, a lot of the students, even after the first 3 years, there's a very important part of them that still wants to pursue at least another year or another year and a half of formal education before they go on the job market, while they would have had the opportunity of just finishing 3 years and go on the job market immediately. Now, at the same time, I do think that people will realize that they will be combining things in different ways. And they will be combining perhaps a certain degree in a certain area that they see as more fundamental with a variety of these micro credentials. And I see that even with the students here. I see many students that during their undergraduates and their graduate degrees are doing on the side, perhaps even something on fundamentals of AI, or they're doing a little bit of a micro credential on a particular topic that they want to explore a little bit more, or if they're taking a degree in robotics or in mathematics, maybe they'll do a few micro credentials in the area of finance because they want to learn a little bit of that and learn. So there's going to be a huge opportunity and a very important demand for these micro credentials, and it will span throughout the lifetime, because as people go into their job market, they may feel that they need to deepen up a little bit of their capabilities in a certain area, and they'll pursue a micro credential in that specific element rather than necessarily go back and do a full degree. Where I see that as both an opportunity and as a threat is that I think that universities that have a very established brand and the global reputation in particular, if they decide to go into this space, they can leverage that brand also in the micro credential space to really sell that, in millions, let's put it this way, and that may become a source of extra revenue, at least in areas where they're seen as very strong, right? On the other hand, if you're a university in the middle ground or an undifferentiated with not a lot of brand, and you lose some fraction of your market because now there's going to be some people, but not as many people looking for the degrees, and you don't have the brand or the presence in that micro space, then that can become very quickly a threat, because the financial pressure over the diminishing amount of students may not be compensated by other sources of revenue, and that can very quickly be turning into a major threat. So at Imperial, we see that as a very interesting opportunity, and we're learning on that on various grounds by both creating MOOCs and other credentials that people can learn through. For example, we have even the business school, we have a fundamentals of business program that we are offering that has every quarter as around 1,000 students that do that from all around the world, to just get a little bit of a basic understanding of some of the introductions to some of the fundamentals of business. And we've created a degree with 3 other universities, which we call Essentials of Management, that we did between the business school at Imperial College, Instituto de Empresa, ESMT in Berlin, and Singapore Management University, where each of us offers 2 modules, and the student can just go through that program. It's very low touch for us. They get a fundamental of business. If they do well, it fast tracks them into coming and do a master's with any of the universities that are offering that set of credentials. And so it's a win-win for everybody. The students get their feet wet on what they're going to be learning at the whole level. We get to learn a little bit more about the students. It can be it can work at a very high scale. So this is the kinds of opportunities that are coming out there, but this can also become a threat if you don't have the capabilities, the learning, or the reputation to be in this space. And this gets taken over by some startups or established firms like the LinkedIn's or Facebook Learning that are also entering, or Google that are also entering in this space in big time.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, I am not an expert on this, so I can completely defer to Francisco. I think that there's, I would say, you know, the field of AI is trying to figure out how to broaden access to the skills needed without going through degree programs in order to simply make the skills more widely accessible. And so I'm really happy to see things like Coursera and OpenCourseWare that provide skill-based assessments rather than requiring that people get credentials or micro-credentials. I realize that puts universities in a tough spot because it potentially reduces income. Although I would say at the margins, most of the people who are getting these skill-based credentials are people who very often wouldn't have been able to afford university programs. So I'm happy to see that, because I think ultimately we need a much larger workforce with these skills than universities are going to be able to train alone.
Mm-hmm.
Corinne, you're on mute.
Yeah, the sound again. Yeah.
This is beyond help, Jason. Good thing that we're down to the last 5 minutes. Does anyone else have a question? Otherwise, I have one that is kind of short and maybe would be a good conclusion question. But I would certainly give the floor to somebody else if anybody else had a question. Well, I wanted to ask you that you might say you're not experts, but as professionals whose work is involved in the work of a university on a daily basis, you must have some idea what you would answer. The question is the following: what in the, let's say, the future university, or the university of today already, but such as it is going to continue developing under the impact of technology, AI, big data, etc., in future, what role do you think, if any, would there still be for what I would call the historical mission of universities, which is beyond guaranteeing employability, passing on skills that are directly transferable to the labor market, all of that? There is the idea that the dimension of developing, cultivating a critical mind, self-discovery. I'm thinking more of the humanities and what the fate of the humanities will be in that future. And just civic education in general, contributing to society, to the community, which is more in line with, again, the historical mission of universities, and that is perhaps hard to see what will become of that in a technological future. What are your thoughts on that? Whichever wants to start. Whichever one of you.
My quick answer is I don't think there will be a dramatic. I don't think there will be a dramatic change. I mean, we haven't seen a dramatic change in the last several centuries. So even with changes in technology that allow things like digital tutors maybe to become very capable, I think there will still be a need for universities, and I think their role will be pretty similar to what it is today. Over to you, Francisco.
Thank you. I mean, I have a, not a dissimilar perspective. I actually think that that's precisely those elements is one of the things that the universities need to continue to do. And there's going to be some evolution on the role of the professors on that regard, from the point of view of getting them to be more kind of a coach to help, the students discover things. Because one thing that we have to bear in mind is that as we advance with this technology, the access to information is just, it's there. It's a mountain of it. And so one of the things that the universities need to provide is to help the students navigate to that, discover that, understand how you have a critical perspective on that information, and how do you assemble it, recombine it in a way that can create value to yourself and to the communities that you're going to serve. So I think that the role of the professor is going to be less of just transmitting knowledge, which is I think something that's already happening over time, and I think it will become even more significant over the next few decades, to go more of this person that helps the student to navigate through the knowledge in a very positive and discovery and structured way. So I think that's the adaptation in terms of the way that we teach students, the way that we engage students, that we make them learn. But I think, as you were mentioning, Corinne, that the role of the universities is as a safe place to do that and to discover yourself, to discover others, and to do that in an environment that you can be guided before you're sent into the workforce to be able to be a professional, I think is not going to go away. And I think in some ways may actually become even more relevant. Now, the university will have to adapt themselves to be able to work and to realize that the way that it works with the students and the way that it implements its mission needs to be adjusted to reflect this new environment. And that if you have a university that the only thing that's going to be doing is trying to dump knowledge that the student can get by doing something in Coursera or reading or seeing some videos on YouTube. I mean, if the professor is going to keep going to the classroom just doing that, then a university that would do that would get in trouble relatively quickly. But I think if you reflect back on the fundamental role of the university and stay true to the mission, I don't think that that's going to change. And I think all good modern universities and the professors that realize that their role is shifting will adjust, and that will continue into the future.
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank both of you for this stimulating, rich, really fruitful both presentations and discussion. And I'm turning now over to you, Isabel, for the closing of our first day. Thank you again very, very much. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation, for the opportunity.
Final words to say thank you. And that I hope we continue the conversation within IFCU and elsewhere. Thank you, Francisco. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Corinne. Thank you.
Thank you.
And so, yeah. So we now, I'm sorry, I don't seem to be able to get my video on, so you'll have to trust me on this. Because we'll be moving to our last presentation of the day with Rector Ignacio Sánchez. Let me just.
Thank you, Isabel. I guess I would like to thank all the speakers and also the organizers, because this almost 4 hours of discussion and forum has been great. I guess the topic, artificial intelligence and Catholic universities, is a very relevant topic. As we said at the beginning, it's unfortunate that we cannot be in Rome, but we can discuss these two main issues that were done by the round tables with these excellent speakers. One, the artificial intelligence or after the COVID-19, and the second one, the universities 4.0, how artificial intelligence and big data are transforming universities. First of all, I would like to thank the speakers and also the moderators because I guess they did an excellent job. I have been taking notes and also putting some remarks in the presentations that we just received. In this a little bit more than 10 minutes, I would like to say that for sure artificial intelligence is much more than science and technology, and I guess for our institutions, universities, this is very relevant in the mission of training, in the mission of teaching, and also in research. As two or three speakers said, artificial intelligence has a long-term history, 70 years, one said, but in the past 10 years has been rapidly growing. And also, probably in each university, the pandemic has an important impact. I mean, everyone was talking about this issue 1 or 2 years ago, but now it's an issue that everyone is talking about the table. One main issue is the inequity and economy. Since we have gaps in our countries, particularly in the underdeveloped countries, with artificial intelligence, these gaps could be broadened, could be much more severe. So one issue is to take care about that. Now, I really like the first panel because, I mean, particularly the first panel took the issue of the humanity or humanistic issues about the role of philosophy, the role of ethics, the role of the humanistic areas in artificial intelligence. The questions of privacy, the question of facial recognition in privacy, the question of privacy in our data. And also, I would like to put something that we don't discuss, but is in Chile at least something that we are analyzing, is the neuro rights, is the rights of taking our neuro data that you know that machines can take out of you some data, your thoughts, your ideas, your thinking. There's a lot of research about this, and in our university, in the Catholic University in Chile, we have an interdisciplinary team composed by, for sure, lawyers, but also bioethics, psychologists, psychiatrists, engineers as well, and we are giving some advices to our people in the parliament, because we would like to put in our constitution one article in the sense that no one can take your neuro data out of you with the artificial intelligence development. There's a lot of research in different animal models that the data can be taken out, and you can predict the behavioral of the animal, you can predict the EEG of the animal, etc. So I guess neuro rights has to be, has an ethical debate that has to be taken into account. In the first panel, one of the main questions that I guess I would like to remark is the definition of a human being, how that can be changed with artificial intelligence. This is not just a matter of data, it's not just a matter of information, but it's a more profound matter. Now, in the second panel, Isabel, I guess it was great to see the value of the universities in the real society. It is important to remember when Pope Francis was in Chile 2 years ago, and he visited our university. One of the messages he gave to us was that universities are labs of the society, and should be labs not only for scientific data, but also for relationship, also for humanity, also for being an example to society in issues like sustainability, but also in the one that we are discussing now. So I like the idea of knowing that the information is there, but we have to learn to teach the students how to navigate, how to search the information. I like the idea of interdisciplinarity or multidisciplinarity in the projects that we have to conduct. The idea of the impact of the universities in society in all the fields. I mean, with the professors that presented the scientific advances and the data, but how this data can be merged with the humanities, with a complete human development, and with a complete teaching of our students. In this sense, I guess we have to reinforce the issue of that areas like medicine, areas like psychology, they have to work side by side with the main areas of engineering, mathematics, analysis, and so on. In our university, we are working on that with new programs in data science, but with a lot of biological support and impact to have this combined teaching program coming from the biology and also coming from the mathematics background. The credentials that you asked, I guess, were really well explained, and to me, it's a crucial issue as well. And to close, I will say that the importance of partnership, the importance of working together. That's why I really congratulate Isabel and the team for putting this topic on this forum, because I guess no one university can tackle all the issue alone. Everyone has to make links and bridges to work together, and also the importance of networks. One by one university or a group of 3 or 4 is not the same that a network that can locate it or can focus some areas of research and work to put people together that had the same interested and the same knowledgement. So in this sense, IFCU can give also an impact and a gift to the university system. Thank you, Isabel. I would like to finish this just to be on time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ignacio. I think this was truly a great day to start the conversation around AI and the many challenges for us in this uncanny moment. And tomorrow we'll resume our work with a panel on ethics. So until then, thank you very much to all the speakers, and see you tomorrow.